Alfonso, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Yes, hi. Well, I'm Alfonso Silva Santisteban. Based in Lima, Peru. I'm a public health physician by training. I've been working for more than 15 years now in research areas around LGBT minorities, especially transgender people, HIV prevention, human rights. And then I started working on journalism around 5 years ago. I started first as a photographer, self-taught photographer, and then workshops, also getting into writing. So that's something that I'm doing as a side project and trying to also sometimes tackle topics that I deal with on my research, but also try to use journalism because I think it's a tool that allows us to have faster conversations and engage more people than just an academic audience, for example. So I had people around me that were like probably 10 years ago that were starting to move on alternative media organized using social networks, and a lot were photographers covering aspects that usually were not on traditional media. And I started seeing the power of that and also get interested started looking at pictures differently, more because that was an area that I always had said, like, no, this is not my thing, visual arts is not my thing. And then you start seeing that you like it. And then a friend told me, like, the most important aspect is that you are where things are happening, that you get engaged, and it kind of allowed me to think, oh, maybe I can do this. And then it took me a while until I decided to buy a DSLR camera entry level. I wanted to go to a school here, but it was kind of expensive, and the schedule didn't match, and said I can do it by myself maybe. And I started. There's a lot of resources in YouTube that teach you the technical aspect, and then the rest is doing it, right? So that's the thing of photography or journalism, is the type of practice that you have to do it to being able to learn it, right? So I started using my camera and taking it everywhere. And then here it was a time where there were a lot of protests in Peru happening in different areas, and that was kind of like my field work. And at some point, I start talking to people on some outlets and sharing my stuff. And that's when I start getting more involved and see how journalists worked more professionally, and the writing piece became more appealing too.
Okay, so you do both the photography and the writing.
I went into a program from the University of Toronto, which is a journalism fellowship that works closely with News Decoder, where basically they give people that have an expertise already in an area, they give journalistic tools. And that allows you to start pitching and writing stories. And then, I mean, again, this is a side project for me. It's not my everyday work. It's at the university, but I've been able to choose some stories that kind of also already fit topics that I have more information and be able to photograph or write, which is kind of what happened with the story with transgender women violence here in Peru.
On the journalism side of things and photography side of things, what have some of your highlights been?
Well, personal highlights is it's always the possibility of being able to talk to people or follow something that has happened that probably I wouldn't be able to be near as a regular citizen, right? Like for example, here in Peru, it's not well. I'll start with a happy one. I've just come back from Iquitos from the Amazonian in Peru, because a group of movie makers did a film festival there. The main act was a floating. People would go in canoes in an area that floats 6 months a year. It's community cinema working with indigenous population. So I pitched the story to a Spanish newspaper. They liked the idea, so I was there, and I've been doing the story, following like the activities. I wanted to be a witness of what was going on, because I also like these processes of community art or art for social issues. But the journalistic side was the excuse, so I had the possibility to talk to people, to take pictures, to be there, and then write something, right? So for me, that's what gives me the more joy or interest, being able to then tell a story. Well, how successful you are in engaging or in transmitting what you witness is a different area, and it's not for you to decide, but it's part of the exercise, right? because then when you are getting more involved, you have the tools to read yourself and say, oh, maybe I could have done this differently. Or you read someone else's work and say, oh, look how he has managed to transmit this in very few words, or the ideas that are behind, like, and then that's how you get, how do you improve, I think, right? By practicing and being able to track your own work because you're getting more tools, right?
And what have some of the worst experiences been for you?
For example, well, the story on the violence against transgender women. We also have had political violence here. The past year, 50 people died on uprisings in the southern part of Peru. Last year, or last December, when there was the 1 year of the killing that happened in a city in Ayacucho, I went there to cover because again, the anniversary of the killings were not covered by mass media, so I went there for a more specific outlet in Lima, and I was sharing with the families. In the Andes, they do a sort of celebration after a year, where they changed the black clothing, like the dual shifts to another different area. And it was very hurtful because justice hasn't been served yet. The killings were committed by security forces. This has been documented by Inter-American system. There are a lot of resources that lets you know that kind of what happened. But it was hard because, again, it's those stories where it is important to tell what is going on. You are talking about people that are kind of like less important, so less power to be able to show their struggle, and at the same time you don't want to victimize people. You don't want to show them as weak. This is families that are dealing with pain, but also doing a strong fight for justice and memory, and probably it will last many years until some justice is served, if hopefully will. So it's one of those stories that kind of like what you're doing, you think, oh, maybe this is important, but at the same time it overpasses you, right? The issues that you're reporting on are far more like you're not going to be able to change anything, or like and you have to make terms with reality sometimes, right?
Focusing on that article, you wrote an article for us called Trans Rights Becomes a Life and Death Issue in Peru. And I'd like you just to break it down for us in a sentence or two. Tell us what is this about?
Well, the article in the end is about the exclusion and discrimination that transgender people live in general, but in this case, it was about a specific moment where, because of organized crime, dealings with sex work, people were killed. Transgender women were killed brutally, and the report was used in that moment, and that episode of violence, which is not very common at that level, because you're talking about assassinations. Is you have the violence that is going on every day, but trying to show that this is like the extreme phase of something that it's already going on, and it's always kind of going on, right? That was the goal of how to frame it. I don't know if it was successful, but that was what I was trying to do.
And what's at the root of this issue then?
Of this specific, it was a mixture, because it had to do with a territorial turf around sex work, but it was originated by the municipality that closed an area of sex work of cisgender women, that made them move, and then there was a territorial dispute with transgender women. So it also shows the how authorities cannot deal with this. They sweep under the rug, and then this problem occurred, and then currently there are sex work mafias that try to collect money from sex workers, and they basically, what they did was threaten transgender women to get out of the area. They kidnapped two and killed them, and recorded in video and sent the video to the community. So the community was horrorized, but they reacted. They went 2 days afterwards. They were on the police precinct demanding justice, demanding action. It's one of those issues that mobilized the community, that you can see also the sympathy of people, and saying enough, right? So that was kind of like motivated me to try to show this is going on, but also people want to respond and want to change things, right?
And who is affected by this issue?
Well, most directly In this case, it was transgender women, right? In Peru, the legal framework is not protective, and a lot of transgender women have issues to access education or different job options, and sex work becomes a thing. That's already a problem, and if that is going to be in really violent conditions, then that complexity becomes worsened, right? And that's something that authorities need to show. Like if we are already setting the field so that people are going to be marginalized, but then even so there's going to be extreme violence, so you can't neglect a group of people like that, right? Additionally to what people can do for their own living and improve conditions, nobody can I make decisions by myself, but I'm not able to control my whole environment, right? So there are responsibilities there that have to do with the public area of things, right?
How do we solve or how do we better the issue?
I mean, that's where politics comes in hand, right? In the sense of us, we as reporters, we tell a story, but what I'm saying is there's a story of a group of people demanding improvements. Why are they demanding that? What are they demanding that? Who are they want to take accountable? That's the type of things that we can understand and explain, and that allow us to make better questions to authorities. Like, what has been going on here? Like, have you done this or not? Because now you have kind of like the instruments to be able to make those sort of questions. Because sometimes we do the question and the official story, they're going to tell you that they're doing what they can. But that not necessarily is true, right? So that's the type of things that kind of like talking to the involved stakeholders, to the people affected, allows you to also understand what could have been done different or what could be done different.
What can students do to fix the problem or to help fight the problem?
I mean, there are various levels, right? One is what you believe, what you want, which again is not, I don't think is divorced from objectivity. You can my interest is gender violence, my interest is environment, my interest whatever, but and you can be objective on the way, like how you document facts, the resources you take, but you're probably not going to be neutral, and that's okay, because I do want things to change regarding transgender issues or regarding environment, and I do want to do that. I'm not going to lie when I'm reporting. I'm not going to be biased and ignore if things are more complex. So that's my own ethical commitment to the practice. But I think it's okay not to be necessarily neutral. You want things to change or to move to a direction. And I think it's part of, like, if you're a younger person and the interest is journalism, is try to commit to the topics that interest you the most responsible you can with the practice ethically, and that means how rigorous you are with your own time, how much are you willing to talk to different people, how much do you want to listen, connect to the people that are most affected, to which sometimes are harder to reach if you are not directly involved with the population, but in the end is the people who are experiencing the issues that you want to report on. So you need to talk to people involved.
A lot of the students that we work with do write, pitch, and then write and shape their own pieces. And so we kind of want to know what that process was like for you. So to see whether they share the same difficulties or the same.
It was hard.
Face the same problem.
It is still hard. At first, for me, it was one of those things where somebody tells you this is how you do it, but then that doesn't mean that you know how to do it. Like, I kind of understand what this is meant to be, but I've still not been able to. What's a story? For me, it was, for example, I come from academia. So in academia, you talk about a topic. Gender violence is this and that, and the framework is this. But in journalism, it's about this happened to this group of people, and that allows you to understand other broader issues. And that took me a while, and that's still a process where I think I'm starting to get better, but I think it's a process. What's a good story? What is news? Like, this is interesting. This tells you more. It's not just something to happen to one person. It talks about other issues. It could be happening in this specific city in Peru, but somebody in Germany is going to read it and relate to that. So I think that's a process. And I think probably is the hardest part, and probably is why you have people that are still learning and have 30 years doing something, right? But I think you have to trust yourself. Also, I think mentoring and guidance is important to be able to talk to somebody and ask, I try to do this, but I see that it didn't work. What can be done differently? Or this is my idea, and somebody tell you, yeah, but you're not looking at this angle. And also read other people's work. Talk to your peers. If somebody does a cool story and it goes right away and it seemed like easy, talk to the person. What happened? How do you do it? Like learn from peers. I think it's part of the thing that I also like about this sort of practice of journalism is because you can rely on peers and learn from them and collaborate.
And in writing this piece in particular, what did you learn?
On the one hand, the degree of violence, the degree of cruelty that sometimes can happen, and you make face value of that, and because and that the degree that we are allowed sometimes to tolerate certain people suffering in a certain way, and we can continue with our everyday life. I'm not saying that we should stop and suffer and just suffer. No, but what I'm saying is sometimes we don't get into what's going on there. And then also the other thing that I learned is how sometimes institutions can allow things to happen, can not get involved in a certain sense and stop. Because in this case, for example, specifically of you have Peru has received 1.5 million migrants from Venezuela. It's an exodus, it's a crisis, right? And 1 million live in Peru, and you have a lot of women, you have sex work. So a lot of these things you can anticipate that are going to be a social issue. You're going to have a mass group of people that are going to be underemployed and are in conditions, and then you have, so these things can be anticipated. And if you have protection systems, you could be able to design interventions or that could allow you to contain that. But sometimes we don't. And then we react when the situation is already extreme or unacceptable. Because, yeah, the murders of what I report here was reaching the space to be unacceptable, right? And we should try to anticipate that from happening, right? So you'll get to learn also how these dynamics of institutions, of decision makers are a bit more complex, but they also have their own way of operating, and you can get to understand how to deal with that, how to talk to people with that, how to make somebody accountable. I think is part of that's one of my areas of interest, but I think that analogy can be translated to whatever topic you address. You get to start to understand the dynamics of that area, right?
And in writing it, how did you find the people and the experts to help you tell the story?
Well, in this case, it was a bit more direct because it is an area that I work with. I know people from the community, so it was easier to contact people from the transgender community. But the third thing I did was, this happened on a weekend. On Tuesday, I get to know that people were going to go outside a precinct, and I went there. I go with my recorder, and I start talking to people. The other thing is, because this is an issue that is not so important, there are not many media. And people do appreciate that you are there, because in the end, you are one of the few that are going to report about it, right? Then they can disagree with what you wrote. But at that point, some people will want to talk. So that's when you talk to people, and then you can make some contacts, come back. For example, that day a congresswoman went in, I talked to her, and then I talked to her advisor, and then I packed for a interview, right? So it's kind of like you start making your and then, well, the other part was doing some research to back up some of the, in this case, of the inequities, right? What is not like on the legal frameworks, on information. Some of the information we had generated as part of, I had regenerated as part of my research, right? But start talking to people, right? And from then building. I mean, that's the part that interests me most on the journalistic side. I'm not driven to data journalism. I like them more like talking to people.
I think I'm right in saying that your story, you said not many people report on it, and it's kind of a lesser story maybe in certain circles. but I think I'm right in saying that it's our most read article. That one that you
Yes,
wrote on.
yes, and I don't know how that happened. I think at some point somebody in the U.S. acknowledged some transgender rights issues and talk about Peru and people. But for example, one of the things that happened after that is last year I got an email from a group of lawyers that were managing an asylum case of a Peruvian transgender woman in the U.S. in New York, and they had read the article. They had seen that I have done some research on that, and they asked me if I could be a witness for the case. So I had to write an affidavit to show, like, because the asylum was that if the person went back to Peru, she was not in safe completely, right? And I participated on that, and last a couple of weeks ago was the audience, and she was granted asylum, right? But that happened because of the article.
It's amazing where your stories and where your photos can lead you.
Yes, it was a small piece on News Decoder, but in the end, in this specific case, it made a difference for one person, and I think that's more than enough. It's good to be able to be part of that small process, but important for somebody else, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you had to pin it down, what do you think is the toughest part of writing or reporting a story?
I mean, at two levels. At one level is when you have a lot of information and you want to, and very small, lesser words to decide what's the most important, and you don't want to be shallow, right? And then at another level is when you're dealing with stories. How do you tell a story that is deep enough, but where you are being respectful of somebody else's suffering, and like that balance between showing too much, and so re-victimizing, being not, or and telling what is need to know. I think that's a tough part, but also it's like you've seen a lot. What are you going to show the rest that is going to be able to reflect what you have seen, right? Or at least the most important elements, because sometimes you do need to keep some times aside. You don't have enough space. I think that's still something that I'm learning, but again, I'm confident that is the type of thing that you improve the more you do it. The more chances you have to do it, the more you're going to improve.
And finally, if you had one top tip for students and for budding journalists, what would that one top tip be?
I would say follow your curiosity and enjoy the process. Enjoy it, right? Like, okay, you're going to suffer in your pitch. Nobody receives your pitch, or like, where do I polish this? But that, like, you will have a lot of failings and you will have a lot of opportunities to be able to do it. But I think the most important part is to make sense of what you're doing for yourself. And I think the curiosity that drives you to research a study, to tell a story, it's the spark. But then enjoying the process of doing it, of talking to people, of reading documents, I think is what motivates you to keep going. And I think it's something that if you incorporate it to what you do, it keeps you. It's kind of like the glue that makes sense of why are you doing what you're doing, because that's sometimes happen. You are in a situation where you're saying, why am I here? I could be in my house, like, but you make sense. And I think it's a process that it's ongoing. It's not something that you take for granted. You have to revisit that feeling every once in a while.
I think that's great advice. And Alfonso, we'll leave it there for now. So thank you so much for chatting
No,
with me.
thank you for the invitation.